Welcome back, everyone, to episode 115 of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast, which is also the podcast of the new millennium. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, the podcast host who's lived a very full and active life. And I have to apologize to my co-host and our guest. I'm sorry I was late, but I started unbuttoning my shirt, and it takes a while. Takes a lot longer than I thought, but I'm not the only one who is wandering around this very legitimate religious college. Who else is here with me?
Well, it's me, Steve Guntley, and I'm not working hard. I'm on the internet. This is the podcast about excessive chest-rubbing, oily boys, and jib-jab voodoo dolls. That's because this is the podcast about the VOODOO Academy series, David DeCoteau's homoerotic supernatural chillers. Is chiller the right word? Thriller is not quite the right word either. I don't really quite know how to describe this movie. We will get into it. But we're very excited.
We'll go with chiller.
Well, let's go with chiller. Yeah, let's keep that. Yeah. But we have a very cool guest joining us to talk about these deeply wild movies. I'm excited to get into it. Who's joining us today, Jared?
Oh, Hi. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. We have an amazing guest today. Our guest is Sarah Lyons. She is a director and writer and occult expert. So naturally, we have to bring someone like that on to talk about these movies. But she's also just a really kick-ass staple in the New York horror scene. Just recently had her debut feature, The Woods, premiere at an amazing screening at the Roxy Theater. And she's just an all-around awesome person and a really great fit for this episode, we thought. So, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. We're excited to have you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's exciting to be here. You know, true art transcends labels. And I think that movie, what you're getting at there, Steve, is that this movie, it's indescribable. And that speaks to the quality and I think the rich text that it is.
Exactly. Yes. Would you put a beam of light in a cage?
No, you can't. It's truly bottled lightning. This film is truly bottled lightning.
It's about the essence of it. It's about it's about the ways it makes you feel. And for me, it made me feel like my chest might itch. I don't know. There was something about the way that the actors were performing in this movie that made me think, is there something on my chest? Should I scratch my chest right now?
Steve, I had a different reaction, which was that this movie really made me want to bust out the Vicks Vapor Rub.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you need to decongest right now. You know, especially
who is it for? Who is the chest rubbing for? Because the whole time I'm watching this and I'm like, if sex doesn't happen, like if people aren't getting dick down soon, I am walking out of this fucking living room, because it's like, it's not just a tease. It's like, it's to the point where you're like, this has to be a kink that I don't know about. This has to be like vor or something. Like, this has to be something that I'm like, wait, people are into just that.
And Sarah, we are excited to welcome you to the wild world of David DeCoteau, because this is a recurring motif. We were talking about this before, and we're pretty sure that David DeCoteau is the most represented director on our show. He is incredibly prolific. He's had some highs, he's had some lows, but he almost always has chest rubbing, and I would say at least 50% of the time, tighty whities. I think that's the recurring themes that we're getting to see in these movies. So we have a great deal of affection for David DeCoteau, even if we don't have a great deal of affection for all of his movies. But this, we'll get into it a little bit, but this is the most authentic and unleashed version of David DeCoteau that we've gotten to see so far.
Sure is.
It is the film of his that he is proudest of. And I think it is kind of the truest expression of him as an artist.
I will say, I find that movies like this, in particular, the two we're going to talk about today, they're kind of easy fodder for a lot of jokes, and we'll make a bunch of those jokes, and we'll point out things that are silly or things that don't quite work and things that didn't, age well or anything like that. I mean, I think, all kinds of art can be analyzed and kind of picked apart. But I think I actually did find, reading a little bit about the making of at least the first movie we're going to talk about, and, what that movie meant to David DeCoteau, to be kind of fascinating to read about and make it kind of an interesting thing to talk about, because contextually, the movies themselves don't give you a lot. I was going to say there's not a lot of meat on that bone. That's not accurate. These are some beefy boys.
Oh, there's some meat on those bones.
There are some meaty bones in this movie.
There's meat and there's bones.
There is bones.
Sure.
The bones, I mean, Sarah, like, so what Sarah mentioned,
there could have been boning at all, quite frankly.
Right. So like
a boning,
Right. What Sarah mentioned before, like if there isn't sex in this movie, spoiler alert, there is no sex happens in either of these movies at any point. So those bones, while somewhat protruding, are often restrained and restricted by a FUBU boxer brief.
Sure.
Yeah, they're simultaneously X-rated and G-rated at the same time, weirdly enough.
That is the best description of David DeCoteau I've ever heard.
Absolutely. It is. Yeah, that's a great descriptor. It is deeply smutty, but also deeply wholesome. There is something very pure and kind of like something weirdly old-fashioned about the fact that it's just like, I just like looking at attractive men. Like that's his whole thing. It's like, I'm not going to make him do anything. I'm just going to like, let's look at him for a while.
Both of these movies, these movies are not so much movies as they are sentient fireman calendars.
1,000%. Well, and the first one is the that calendar that they sell outside the Vatican with like the hot priests. The first one is
that. They do that? What?
Have you not seen this?
A hot priest calendar at the Vatican?
Yeah, I don't think the Vatican sells it, but like the tourist shops like around the Vatican, like in Rome, they have like hot priest calendars that they sell.
Oh man,
I can just picture Scott from Fleabag.
Yeah.
I just picture it in like one of those like spinning like newsstand shelves, like next to like a calendar of Peter Steele.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, there's the Playgirl like wall just outside the Vatican there.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Playgirl, and I think this movie has a lot in common with like the Playgirl fallacy, let's say, the Playgirl kind of misnomer. This is a magazine being sold ostensibly.
That was fallacy spelled with a PH, right?
Exactly. Yes. That was exactly that. Yeah. That's a publication ostensibly being sold to women to ogle men. But that's just because like you weren't allowed to say who you were actually marketing it to. It's a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, of the way that most women consume pornographic material. It's kind of this is male facing. It's just this was a time in film history when you couldn't really sell a movie on that, or people were afraid to sell a movie on that. Actually, let's take a step back. Let's talk a little bit about this first movie, some of the statistics behind this. VOODOO Academy was released August 1st, 2000. It's directed by David DeCoteau using the pseudonym Richard Chasen, a.k.a. Dick Chasen. Yeah, great nickname. And it's written by Eric Black, and it stars Deborah Mayer, Riley Smith, Chad Burris, Kevin McAllister, Huntley Ritter, Ben Indra, and Drew Fuller. I believe that is pretty much the full cast. Now, like I mentioned, DeCoteau refers to this film as his baby, and he considers this the favorite film that he's ever made. He originally shot this under the name Voodoo Queen in a not so subtle nod to the homoerotic content. I want to take a step back and give some context for Sarah, because you mentioned that you wanted to get a DeCoteau education on here. So to give a little bit of context on who DeCoteau was in the Full Moon universe of this, okay, he got his start working for like Roger Corman as a PA, like way back in the 80s when he was like 18. And then he started making these incredibly cheap, hard to look at horror movies in the mid 80s, which caught the attention of Charles Band, and Charles Band kind of brought him into the fold, and he's one of his most like reliable recurring directors. And like I mentioned, there have been a lot of high highs in there, and they've been a lot of low lows. The high highs would probably be Puppet Master 3, which I believe both of us have near the top of our rankings list of all the Full Moon movies, like period. It is one of the best Full Moon movies. It's easily the best Puppet Master, and it's DeCoteau being given a little bit of a budget and a little bit of time to make a movie, and he did a really, really great job. But most of the movies that he makes, he does not get that much time or attention. And in fact, he was the person who was put in charge of Torchlight Films, which was the softcore erotic subdivision of Full Moon. So that's where we get test tube teens from outer space and bikini babes and all of that stuff.
How dare you, Steve? That is test tube teens from the year 2000.
I am so sorry.
Otherwise known as virgin hunters, which we did. Which we covered on this show. And,
yes.
you know, Steve, I think not only are we two people who are the right choice to give Sarah an education on Dave DeCoteau, but like we can make that higher education, because if this cast taught me anything, is that if we added 3 more people to this podcast, we could have a full-blown college.
Absolutely.
That's all we need. We're so close. We're so close to an entire college.
And yet at this huge college with all of these empty rooms, and they're in this tiny little room where not even the boom operator can hold up the boom to the ceiling because it keeps dipping into frame.
Oh my God. He is the king of the boom shot.
So good.
We get so many boom shots. But there's a great anecdote in Charles Band's autobiography where he said he had a PA come to him one day and said, like, have you been checking in on the Torchlight movies? Because Charles Band kind of does not really like those movies. He gets kind of like shy around like the super sexy stuff. So he kind of passed that off. And the PA had kind of come to him and said, like, have you seen the new movies? He's like, no, what's going on? It's like, they're getting really gay. And it was just a reflection of David DeCoteau's aesthetic. And I would argue that it's present from the beginning of the Torchlight movies. Like, they are shot, the sex between men and women is shot very indifferently and very quickly, and like without really a whole lot of concern about the mechanics or the lighting or anything like that.
Not only that, Steve, but when you talk about like when we were talking about like Beach Babes 2, Cave Girl Island, that went from indifference to almost like he was how should I say this? It was almost like Dave DeCoteau was like had a grudge against the female actors in that movie. Like they were shot, those sex scenes and the angles were shot in such an unflattering way. Like in the first Beach Babes from Beyond, it's kind of like straightforward TNA stuff, but it's very kind of wholesome and tame. When it got more outwardly softcore with Beach Babes 2, it was like he's really concerned with how the men look in those scenes. Like those bodies were glistening and the angles were concerned only with the men.
And that's kind of what's amazing about this movie to a degree, is that for this movie, DeCoteau finally just got to make a gay movie. And Charles Band was actually on board to a point, but I think he got cold feet after a little bit because it just didn't look like there was a market for this. To zoom out even further, I want to talk about queer horror in the 90s, or rather the entire lack of queer horror in the 90s. Like, you know, horror, queer themes have been present in horror since the beginning. Like the very presence of vampires in fiction is just like one big like queer metaphor, you know, and it's been used that many times. But it's almost always subtext, you know, even up through the 90s. Like it's like you could make a very real argument for like Interview with the Vampire. You know, I've seen people make really good arguments about Nightbreed. I still contend that Stu is in love with Billy in Scream, and that motivates a lot of his actions in that. But this is all subtext, you know, they're not allowed to just kind of like come out with it and just like make a movie about queer people. We're only like now kind of getting to a point where we're being better about that. And even then, there's still a lot of room to grow. Like queer people tend to be supporting characters or side characters, or, you know, so it's a whole other conversation, and one that, like, you know, a straight white man like myself is not really qualified to talk about.
No, Steve, are we not the two most qualified people to have this conversation?
We easily should. But like, this is all just to kind of put it in context and say that this kind of movie did not exist in 2000 when this came out. So forgive me as I go out on the thinnest of possible branches here, but this movie is at least a little pioneering for gay content in a horror adjacent field in B movies. You know, this is just a thing that was completely underrepresented.
And I also feel like there is a connection, obviously, between like queerness and horror, and kind of like the general themes of horror that we're defining as queerness in horror that have always been there, like the otherness of it. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the occult aspect of it too. You know, a lot of times, you know, you see themes of one kind of bleeding into the other also. So Sarah, as an occult expert, I also want to just really briefly, before we get back on the DeCoteau train here, know a little bit about your kind of horror origin story and when this started to click for you, that you were interested in, the stories of many of these movies with these queer subtexts, but also, a little dabbling of the occult in there. So when did it all click for you?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that actually the way that I got into horror was because I was so interested in the occult, like even as a kid. And horror is like the only genre where that's a theme and that's a thing that you can watch and see people talk about. And even if it's cheesy or if it's not very serious, it's like the only medium that I could go to that was talking about the stuff that I was interested in. So I got into horror from a very young age. I mean, I was always into weird stuff and spooky shit. And it's kind of one of those, I can't tell you like an exact moment where I was like, oh yes, I am interested in this now. But I think it all came together because horror is the genre that has all the stuff that I'm into in it. So it just kind of fit very naturally. Even when I was younger, I think that like and when I was more easily scared by this stuff, like I used to love watching The Twilight Zone, even though it scared the shit out of me. And like those types of things, for whatever reason, my parents let me watch The X-Files and they let me watch Twilight Zone, but they didn't let me watch Buffy until I was like older, until I was in high school. And I don't know why they thought like that's scary. That's like a show and I'm like, those other shows are way scarier.
Yeah,
like,
Buffy's funny and
funny.
And also maybe the best representation of queer horror in that era, although I think it took until the 2000s to get to that point. But yeah, sorry, continue.
No, totally. And I think, I think that Willow got her girlfriend in season 4, right?
Season 4, yeah.
That was still the 90s. That was like 98, 99.
Okay, yeah. It was around there. Yeah.
It was around there. But so that's kind of how I got into that. In terms of this film, I was trying to watch it and be like, okay, is there anything that is like remotely legit here? And the furthest that I can come up, the most interesting thing that I can talk about in terms of that, and the one thing that I was sort of like, that's interesting they're talking about, that is the voodoo serum that they are talking about, like the voodoo powder from Haiti. And she talks about her husband like went down to Haiti and like found this voodoo power, but then mysteriously died. And that's how they're doing the ritual to do this. That got kind of confusing to me, but
yeah,
it is interesting because Wade Davis, the scientist who did make that discovery in the 80s, wrote The Serpent and the Rainbow,
right,
which then was made, of course, into the film. And that movie, I quite like The Serpent and the Rainbow.
I do too.
I'm a defender of it. I think some people are like, oh, they don't. I remember back in the day, people used to really not like it. I think it's gone a reappraisal more recently.
Yeah, and then it's kind of held up to the cultural lens a little bit of like how sensitively was this portrayed or not, or what was the intention behind it. I think the intentions behind that movie are good generally. I don't think but that's a whole other discussion.
I mean, it's like the book is also controversial, right? Yeah. Like Wade Davis as a scientist and as an anthropologist is also controversial for that reason. But I read that book when I was very young, and I was like, because when I was a kid and I was getting into the occult and into magic, you couldn't, it wasn't as accessible as it is now, just straight up. And it was very difficult to get my parents to just buy me actual books on magic. And so I would always have to find like history books or books that were like about anthropology or something, and then like read through the lines for everything. So I read that book when I was very young, and it really opened up my eyes to like the religion of voodoo and the practices surrounding it. I've become lucky enough in my life to know people who don't practice voodoo, but practice other African diasporic religious traditions. And so I'm a little bit familiar with it. It's not what you see in this film, but it's very like, I think that that was the one connection that I thought was kind of interesting, is like, oh, they are actually talking about a real historical thing that happened, and it made its way into this film. And it also made its way into other horror films, and just the legacy of that book and that trope is an interesting thread to follow. I
was very interested to get actually your perspective on this, and if there's any kind of like accurate supernatural happenings at all in this movie.
Imagine if I said yes. Imagine if I was like, oh, they got it so right. This is like,
they spent so much time researching this in their tiny whities.
I've never seen a film that depicted that as accurately as this.
Right.
No,
not since Weekend at Bernie's 2.
Yeah.
I like take my camera and like tilt it a little bit to the side, and I just have a bunch of like little puppet guys in the corner.
Yeah.
No, I mean the idea of the voodoo doll is like a well-trod trope, right? Like that, and it's kind of debatable whether that actually comes from West African tradition, or if that was something that like English settlers that was that came from England, and it was a crossover from like those two cultures meeting through the transatlantic slave trade. I'm not really sure what it is, but there is a tradition of voodoo like stuff like that in English folk magic called poppets.
Oh,
so there is like a little bit of history behind that thing, but it's not this. Unfortunately,
I'm gonna go out on a limb.
Much more fun.
And just say that like maybe accuracy to that world was not necessarily the motivating factor behind this movie, but
I don't think so.
It's okay. I think it's effective for what it's trying to do. Now, like I mentioned, like Charles Band was kind of getting cold feet about this movie, and I think a lot of distributors were as well. So not only did they change the name away from Voodoo Queen to Voodoo Academy, they also released a 23-minute shorter blockbuster cut, basically, and they retitled it to Subhuman. I feel like you can probably get 23 minutes out of this if you just cut the chest rubbing. Like, not even joking. I think you.
But then, what's the movie?
What's the movie? That's what's the movie? But Band did let DeCoteau release Voodoo Academy as a 93-minute director's cut a couple years after that, and releasing both versions proved to be pretty successful. The movie was a decent home video hit, and it actually found a very real, very minor but very real fan community. Like there are people who actually do find this movie pretty important for what it was trying to do. There was a great article I read a couple years ago from Vulture about like the history of queer horror. This one did not make the cut, shockingly, but if you look at the movies that did make the cut, like of the most influential movies of that era, it's things like Killer Condom and Heavenly Creatures, which is not really even a horror film. Like, it's a great film, but it's not really a horror film. So, you know, there were slim pickings to work with there.
Well, when we talked about David DeCoteau's kind of output, I think it was when we talked about Shrieker.
Oh yeah.
We were talking about how Shrieker came as like first in a series of movies that David DeCoteau was churning out all in like 1998. And it was like
11 in a row.
He did like 11 movies in a row. And we said he had a week to make, I think it was maybe a week to make Shrieker. He made this movie in 4 days. Like, he was busy. And really it was kind of as a favor to the fact that he was such a workhorse for Full Moon, you know, that Charles Band kind of like saw past those cold feet and some pushback from Full Moon people.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Charles Band. There were people who worked at Full Moon who were kind of not protesting the release of the movie, but sort of situating themselves where they were saying, you know, this is a bad idea. Like, don't release this movie. And, you know, Charlie wanted to be loyal to Dave DeCoteau because Dave DeCoteau was so loyal to him. And even though he worried about the potential market for it, he eventually, you know, he did cave in the sense that they had this truncated version that they released. He then went back, and once Dave DeCoteau did him the favor of directing The Killer Eye, my understanding is that they then said, all right, no, you know what? Like, we'll make a new DVD edition of this with the complete movie on it. And apparently when they did that, it sold really well.
Yeah. I mean, there is a market for it just because there's nothing else, you know, like there weren't that many. And David DeCoteau has made a little cottage industry. Like, eventually he spun this off into what he calls like the 1313 Pictures, which is the name of his like special effects company that he loans out. But there's a lot of movies that are just called 1313 : Hercules's Adventures or something like that. And it's all just kind of like men in tidy whities, like flexing, you know, and it's not even like those movies dispose of the plot entirely. You know, they call it like, you know, they'll say it's like Athenian or something, but they're clearly standing in front of like a Santa Monica swimming pool, you know, like it's stuff like that. Yeah. So like he found a little industry of this, of like kind of a gay softcore that he still kind of does to this day. And then in between more horror films and family films like A Talking Cat, which is still my favorite movie title of all time. Question mark, exclamation point, question mark.
Well, he parlayed this into starting Rapid Heart Pictures or Rapid Heart Features or whatever the name of the company is. I think it's Pictures. And that was then like his sort of label for this brand of movie, which is pretty great because, you know, he has something that speaks to him and he has the movies he wants to make. And this is the movie that was really responsible for him being able to then, I guess, you know, not only feel more comfortable making the movie he wanted to make, but then having, like you said, Steve, a cottage industry to put these movies out. And he sort of parted ways with Charles Band at that time, shortly after this period in Full Moon, and focused more on the stuff that we were talking about. But, you know, this is kind of the one that spearheaded all of that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when we're talking about these really niche things like this is sort of a pioneering movie in a way for those reasons. So I feel like, you know, you might look at this on the surface as someone who doesn't have this background information or isn't looking into, you know, really specifically niche B movie studios, and they might look at it and just kind of disregard it and be like, well, this is trash, or I don't know what this is, I don't know who this is for, I can't believe someone made this, etc. You know, I wouldn't begrudge anyone those initial reactions to something like this, but if you kind of really look at it as a microcosm of what DeCoteau was doing at that time and how he was parlaying the support of Charlie into this new label for himself, you know, it's a small scale, but it is important.
Yeah.
Within the confines of our show, it's important.
You'll notice we haven't commented on the plot of this movie at all, and that's because if I'm fully honest, I don't know what it was.
I've met authors that write plots and they're all cowards.
Chicken shits.
No, I mean, it was, I will say too, that to your point, it is like just looking at a director who is that booked and busy is always really inspirational for me, even if they're technically turning out something that like people might consider schlocky or bad or like whatever they might think of it. I do think there is like a genuine, I do find that kind of inspirational when a person is just able to put out that much material as a director. It's like, so even if you're doing it in short shoots, even if it's like, you're just kind of turning it out, it's hard work. And so being able to produce that volume of material is actually something I think that is like worth celebrating and like honoring. Yeah, totally. And I will also say to your earlier point, one of the other things that I don't know if this is praise or like something that I thought was very interesting while watching it is I kept being like, I have seen this movie a million times before, but it's been like women. And so just kind of like to the point where I was watching this and I was like, how many times do I see like female objectification in my own life? And I don't even register it because it's so like just what the air that we breathe and that we live in. And so in watching this, you're noticing it because you don't see men be objectified as much. So you're actually like, you know, you're confronted with it almost. And it was so, I actually thought it was very like an interesting idea to kind of sit with while I was watching it.
Yeah, you got a familiar feeling watching it, and then I got a familiar feeling watching the opening credits, and then I remembered, I just have watched the WB.
Yes, absolutely.
Those credits are unbelievable. They're so funny. It's like it's very like One Life to Live or whatever. It's just all the actors, they get their own title card, they get their own like moment where they're framed in front of a stained glass window
for way too long.
They get to turn and like highlight those cheekbones and just really kind of like go for it. And it's much really
blue
funny.
Steel.
Much blue steel.
It's always a good thing when I'm watching a movie and in the credits is puppet department like that. You're in for a good movie when there's a puppet department that is called out in the opening credits.
Listen, this is a movie. This is a film company that is known for their puppets. And I got to say the puppet department dropped the ball on this one. These are just like inert voodoo dolls that have faces poorly superimposed on them. Like they might as well be like Terrence and Phillip on South Park. The way they're just like flappy head nonsense looking things.
I actually gasped when I saw it for the first time. I was like,
it's so funny.
It's crazy.
I had a real, like, I was really struggling. Usually I'm pretty good at like identifying actors in movies and like, oh, I've seen him in this. I was having the hardest time with the lead of this movie. So I did look him up. It's Riley Smith. He played Todd Schellinger on Freaks and Geeks. I don't know if anybody watched a lot of Freaks and Geeks, but he was like the popular kid in school, and still acting today. He has a successful like music career as well on the side. Like he was in like every episode of that recent like Nancy Drew reboot or whatever. Like he works. Yeah, he works. He's still acting to this day. The other person who still works in this movie is Huntley Ritter. I remember him from Bring It On. He's one of the male cheerleaders in that movie. I think he got out of acting entirely, but he runs like a multi-million-dollar like marketing firm now, like out of LA. Like, so he's kind of a big deal now. Pretty great. I mean, because, you know, David DeCoteau is pretty open that a lot of his casting process is just kind of like, who's at the bar tonight? Like who's got a free week ahead? Like who wants to do a movie and doesn't mind being in their underpants? Like, yeah.
And these guys all have a look, because like the one guy, the one character, Billy, I just wrote his name down in my notes as Brad Michael Murray.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of like near beer.
Yeah. And there's just like crunchy, short blonde, crunchy hair. On a bunch of people, and the brunettes are all the same. They all have the haircut. Now, being a person of a certain age, when this movie was shot in early '99, it was, you know, I graduated high school then, and so I had that like little like sideburns, crunchy short brown hair on top. I mean, I had that cut. Me and all my friends had that cut. It's like you just needed like a ringer t-shirt and a choker, and it's like that. You want to fully, and a pair of Jinkos maybe. I might have phased them out by '99, but I might have still been rocking them. If you really want to get a sense of my vibe,
a puka necklace, perhaps.
Yeah. I do not have the hair for spikes, but I was still really trying to spike it up when I was that age, and I'm just like, oh yeah, it does not want to do that, and it looked bad.
I was about to go to college, so it was like, well, what do you need in college? So it was like, I need a ringer tee, I need a puka shell necklace. I signed up for classes. I walked in the door, they just handed me a Dave Matthews Band CD, and I was like, I was good to go.
I've arrived.
Enjoy your Carmen Electra poster and this snap case of The Matrix, and have a good day. Yeah.
It is. I mean, the opening credits are incredible, and like the whole like opening sequence is amazing. I know we were talking earlier about like Buffy, and we were talking about other like queer horror of the 90s, but I'll also say that this movie had a very like anime vibe to me. Like the whole time I was watching it, I was like, you actually could make like just almost transpose it directly, just shot for shot into an anime format, like a 90s anime, and it would work so well. It really gave me a vibe of like a darker, sexier Oran High School Host Club or something like that.
They all had like implied eyeball sparkles. Yeah. They all had like little glints that they were about to do. Like, yeah, there's definitely, look, the tone they settled on. Like, this movie knows what it is, it knows what it's trying to do, and it knows that we don't actually give much of a shit about what's going on in this story. So like, it doesn't waste too terribly much time on that. As is typical with a lot of DeCoteau movies, he likes to cast one woman to kind of counteract like all of the male energy, and he cast well with Deborah Mayer, who R.I.P. by the way, we lost her a couple years after this, but she was in like Blood Dolls. She's in a lot of full moon movies around this era, and she just understands camp. She understands how to bring this kind of like big diva energy to all of these productions. She's fully aware of the quality and caliber of the movies that she's in, and she's like, fuck it, I am here to have fun. And so I thought she always kind of rules. I think she we lost her too soon, but she was great.
She was giving full dominatrix camp in this movie. Like, she was 100%. Giving full like headmistress, like this like private Catholic school, and she's there with like a slave collar on and like this low cut dress. It was so fierce.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. No, she had an amazing look.
The more we see her in stuff like performance in Blood Dolls, and she's going to pop up in a bunch of other movies that we haven't covered yet on the show.
Yeah.
But that seems to be like her vibe. And I'm into it. I've enjoyed the performances that we've gotten from her so far. So it was nice, like you said, DeCoteau casts one woman, but he cast a kind of a full moon mainstay for that period, and that's a welcome addition to this kind of movie.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, should we talk about part 2? Do we have anything at all to say about part 2?
The only thing,
I mean,
yes, I mean, I have things to say about part 2. But I think it's so funny that we struggled in the first movie, and we know the purpose of the movie. It was DeCoteau exercising some demons, making a movie of the stuff that he wanted to see, the stuff that he sort of was dealing with or fantasizing about. And so that's very much on screen. But we struggled a little bit with the actual plot of the movie. Most of the story elements are identifiable. The plot was difficult, except for the fact that on IMDb, this has one of the longest plot synopses of any movie, where it says, young Christopher is just enrolled at the prestigious Carmichael Bible College, managed by somewhat unusual Mrs. Bouvier. After some unexplained disappearances, Christopher does some exploring and discovers that Mrs. Bouvier and the Reverend Carmichael have some very unwholesome intentions for the young men of their school. Will Christopher graduate with his body and soul intact?
Damn.
I mean, I guess, that's what the movie's about. I don't know.
And then, like Mrs. Bouvier, you have to take a huge breath. That was something I kept noticing, is she'd monologue for 5 minutes and then go, anyway, so then we have to go. It's the gaps between the paragraphs get shorter and shorter.
Right.
That they just told you the whole movie, though.
Yeah.
There is, if you get a chance to pull up the VOODOO Academy poster, that is the main photo on IMDb. It is 4 different people who look exactly the same. There are 2 people positioned right above one another who look like they are the same person. And it isn't until you look really closely at it that you realize it's just 2 brunette actors who look incredibly similar. And the bottom guy on the right and the top guy on the left are the 2 main blonde guys who are incredibly similar looking in the movie. It was really hard to keep track of who was who in that movie. And I only knew they were talking about Rusty, who is kind of like the meathead.
Yeah.
Because he's lifting the world's smallest weights when we're introduced to him.
That whole sequence is incredible.
It's all
when
about
he goes
definition.
to meet them. Yeah.
Yeah, just 5,000 reps with this tiny tiny weight in your hand.
Can you measure your biceps, boy?
What is this? The set of The Predator?
He asks him that. The teacher's like, do you measure your biceps? I'm like,
are you a goddamn sexual tyrannosaurus?
You like gladiator movies, son?
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Yeah, I mean, look, I'm fully a movie. I acknowledge that it's not for me, but I can appreciate that it exists, and that it exists in the time and the place that it does, and that it's carved out a very small, very niche for itself, let's say.
Sure has.
But the sequel, which came out much later, is a different question. And I think it is finally the movie that answers the burning question that all of us have. And that's, hey, dude, do you know where the road is? Where's the road, dude? I can't find the road.
It was the first one was fun. The second one was a little bit of a chore to get through, I will say.
It was a bit of a chore.
If you will indulge me.
Yeah, I will.
For listeners, a little inside baseball here. Getting these 2 movies in was the closest down to the wire that I've ever come for one of these recordings. Not to get into any specifics, but it's just been very busy, and I really just made it in just in time, at the 11th hour, getting this thing in. But, I told Steve, I was like, oh man, I'm going to cut it close. I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch both movies. And, Steve gave me some really sound advice, which was, if you just fast forward through the scenes of guys rubbing their chests, you'll cut enough time off and you'll be able to fit them in. Now, the other funny thing about this was that I was working earlier today, and I have, as a teacher, I have a lunch period. I also have a prep period. and I commute home. So I had a little bit of time in there, and I said, I know this movie, the second movie's on YouTube. Maybe I'll watch the second movie first, and I'll watch it on YouTube, and I'll watch it during my prep period at work and during my commute home. So I'm on my school Wi-Fi. So I pull up YouTube and I find I almost said VOODOO Academy 2.
Oh no, the movie is called 2, to be clear. They got the rights to the number 2.
I pull up VOODOO 2 Academy, and I start watching it, and I'm like, oh shit, I have to not be on my school's Wi-Fi watching this. So I go on my data to watch it from work. And I go, okay, the movie starts. It's like an exterior establishing shot of like the neighborhood where they shot E.T. and Poltergeist, basically. And then it cuts to a guy in the shower rubbing his chest. And I go, okay, well, yep, there's one of those chest rubbing scenes. This lasts for the first 7 minutes of the movie.
It was
to
crazy.
The point where I realized I can't watch this here. Because if somebody like the teacher who's covering my class comes to find me, or I step away from my phone for a second, I have a lot of splaining to do if this happens. Yeah. So I just said, no, you know what? Like, I'll wait till I'm out of the building. But then I realized if I watch this on the bus on the way home, like people are going to get a false impression about me. Not that I would be ashamed, and not that there's anything wrong with it if that was what I was into. But I was like, I don't think I can do. And I happened to get home earlier than I anticipated. So I did fast forward through some of the chest rubbing. But for the first 8 minutes of this movie, it is an establishing shot of a neighborhood, an establishing shot of a house, a man rubbing his chest in the shower, and then walking while the camera follows him through the house to a pool and getting into the pool. That's 8 full minutes of the movie.
Yeah, there's no dialogue for the first like 10 minutes. It's crazy.
A bit. Yeah, it's like There Will Be Blood, you know. It's exactly like
I was thinking the same thing.
I mean, to be very, very clear, if you out there are listening are into the chest rubbing, I fully 1000% support this. I'm just saying, if you are into the chest rubbing, you're probably going to get a little bored because it keeps going, and it's also the same footage used over and over again. I think they got 2 minutes of chest rubbing and doubled it, and then doubled it, and then like they just keep using the same footage. So, not begrudging you if you're into this. I'm just saying you're maybe not getting the highest quality chest rubbing that you could be getting.
They use the chest rubbing a lot. They use the tryptophobia rock in the second one a lot.
Yes,
going back to that same rock on the beach with all of the holes in it. I think that it's important to know your audience as a filmmaker and like who are you making this movie for? Who is going to watch this? What's the venue? And I think that this movie in particular is supposed to be played on a TV, at a gay bar, maybe a tea dance at the boat slip in P-Town, maybe it's Bear Week. Like that's where this movie is meant to be watched. And that's the audience for it.
Sarah, can I like proposition something to you then? Can we like ask Jason or Joe Zazzo to put this on when we're at Rock Bar?
1000%. This is literally made for Rock Bar. Like this is made for that, for bars like that. But they're gonna need more fisting if it's that Rock Bar, and there's none of that.
That's what I was saying. This is way too tame for Rock.
It's way too tame for a Rock Bar.
Again, it is a real like if somebody doesn't bone, I'm just going to pull a Sarah and apparently just leave the movie playing, but leave my living room.
Yes,
it's a good move. It's like no, you leave. Yeah, the movie can't stop, but you need to leave. Yeah. But a little bit about this movie. It's called VOODOO Academy. I cannot believe they got the rights to it. It was released October 1st, 2012. It was directed by David DeCoteau, written by DeCoteau and Charlie Meadows. And it stars Sean McCormick, Alex Fox, Josh Randall, Brandon Shinneman, Alex Bugaj, Richie Nuzzolisi, and our token female here is the great Michelle Bauer, who we love. The tagline of this movie is the sequel to the most talked about horror film of the 1990s. And I'm going to say that's inaccurate on several levels. It was not released in the 90s.
If you only focus grouped one very specific group of people, then it might have been the most talked about horror movie.
Yeah,
they're like, but they already made Scream 2.
Right. I want to see their sample size here. Yeah. This is but I appreciate that they're going there. But yeah, no, I will be fully honest. I watched these movies a few weeks ago. We've had like some schedule rechanges and like, so I did not get a chance to rewatch them. So I'm going off a lot of my notes here.
Steve, you and I will balance each other out because I watched them mere minutes ago.
So some of the notes I put here are the first 5 minutes are literally just a man showering, and then he gets in the pool. Wrong order. You're not supposed to shower before the pool. You shower after the pool. Other notes, hot boys just keep showing up and asking about, quote unquote, the road. And that's like, it's like deathbed, the bed that eats level of like, oh, look, I'm attracted to this very far offside road or house. I'm just going to keep letting myself in here. Truly, most of this movie is either B-roll footage of the beach and house or shots of men rubbing themselves. I wrote some of the worst acting we've encountered outside of a Tim Kincaid movie. And those are all of my notes.
It's funny you mentioned Tim Kincaid, Steve, because Sarah, you have no way of knowing this, but there is a Tim Kincaid movie. Now, Tim Kincaid, crazy, sleazy director who worked with a bit in the 80s, gave us Breeders and Robot Holocaust and Mutant Hunt. He has a movie that we have not covered yet on the show, which falls under the umbrella of our show, which is called The Occultist.
Oh, there you go.
And I did not choose that one for you because I did not want to make you sit through a Tim Kincaid movie. I also felt like it was too close to, I think you and I have been talking about scheduling for a while, and it was way too close to our Tim Kincaid triple feature that we did with Jed Shepard. It was like, it would have been just too close to that one to feel good about releasing it.
Yeah,
but now I want to watch it. Now I'm gonna watch that movie. That sounds awesome.
I mean, yeah, to give you the context, just to reiterate for people, this movie was the lighter option compared to a Tim Kincaid movie. This is the more palatable option. And this is, I'm going to say, barely a movie in the same way that I've used that recently with like Savage Island, because it's like, it's only a movie in the very technical sense that it like shows on a TV and runs for an allocated length of time. But like, there's no real plot here. There's no real character development here. There's really nothing to hang on to other than just a lot of shirtless men in skimpy outfits. And that's like totally fine, but it's not really a movie. Less so even than the first film, which at least had kind of like the minor pretensions of a plot. Did this have anything to do with voodoo at all or academies?
Well, it's
tangentially, yes.
At the end, you find out it was built like on the same location as the first college.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So
But
it's a legacy.
They moved the headstones, but they've left the bodies.
But you left the bodies. You misread the scrolls. It's also, I mean, this is a porn set, right? Like that's where they filmed this 1,000%, right? Mm-hmm. Like those beds look like the set of like a porno.
It kind of looks like the same house from A Talking Cat. So I'm wondering if it is just David DeCoteau's house. Like that's kind of a theory that I'm working with, because this house has shown up in a few movies that we've seen, right?
Am I crazy? It looks a lot like the house from Attack of the 50-Foot Cam Girl.
Yeah.
And maybe also Giantess Battle Attack. But
Piranha Women. Yeah.
And Piranha Women. But the problem I run into is that I do know, well, a lot of the newer Full Moon stuff is shot almost entirely, unless it's some kind of like legacy movie or franchise movie shot in Cleveland typically. Mm-hmm. But this is not. I mean, there are palm trees visible. Like this is clearly like this is a Silicon Valley mansion. And the funniest thing is they pull up to this mansion and they walk up to the door and they're so flabbergasted that this house exists, in the middle of nature and is such an eyesore. And then they like walk inside and they're like, oh, wow, this complete shithole is actually kind of huge. It's like, yeah, did you not see the outside? It's the biggest fucking house I've ever seen.
It's a fucking mansion.
About? Yeah, what are you used to living in if like this is a total shithole to you? Yeah.
It's the house from Anora. Like it's the house.
It is. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, I was trying to see, like, I don't know if any of the actors in this really went on to be in much after this. There's a lot of models, like the guy who owns the house is an actor named Richie Nazalese. I think he is actually just a male model most of the time. You know, so like there's not really a lot like of Riley Smiths who have had some other kind of mainstream crossover, but yeah,
you make me think, Steve. You make me think of like one of my favorite Mystery Science Theater riffs, and it's in the movie Hobgoblins. And there's a character named Nick, and Crow sets it up. He goes, "Did you know that the actor who played Nick went on to play Pong in his underwear?" And like just the delivery of it is so fucking funny. Like
it's so good.
There's a little pause after it went on, and I just love. You can put anything there because it's like, yeah, they didn't really act. I think a lot. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, like a porno, a lot of this is improvised.
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite isolated lines of dialogue happens in this movie, and it's by the Sebastian character, the owner of the house, where he's telling them about how there's like road work or construction happening. And he says this line: "The road won't be cleared up till tomorrow night at the latest." So what does that mean? Like it could be cleared up right now?
Yeah, it's clear now. Yeah.
And he says it very exasperated. He's like, at the latest, it's going to be tomorrow night. And I'm like, that's not that.
That's not that. It could be done much sooner. Yeah.
It's also like
it's clearly just a flub. Like he meant to say at the earliest. He misspoke. No, they didn't even care about another take.
It's crazy. And it's also like the conceit of this tree. There's like a single tree that has apparently fallen down and is like trapping people on this road. But it's weird because like, well, you could just drive back the other way. Like it's not impossible to get out, you know, but it's, for some reason, this is now a really big problem for the hot hunks that are driving through this.
I don't know if you know this, Sarah, but hot hunks can't drive a car in reverse.
Yeah,
that's
true.
It's like they're
that is a gay stereotype. That's a gay stereotype.
Oh man, I don't want to be attached to that now. Guys, put down those angry tweets. Don't cancel me, please.
Jared said gay people can't drive. We're only allowed to make that joke.
No, but it's okay because it's common knowledge that like people have trouble driving when they're going through the hunk belt of America. You know, it's like there's this little narrow portion of California that's just densely populated with hunks, and man, do they not know how to drive.
It's the beef
belt. They don't know they're beefcakes. They don't know you can put a car into reverse. It's like Zoolander. I can't turn left.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's very big Zoolander energy coming off of all of these guys, which is a delight. You know, this is clearly done in 2 or 3 days, maybe even an afternoon for a lot of it, because so much of this movie is just recycled footage of flexing, like standing around and like flexing them abs, and they look fantastic. But it was definitely a movie where I'm like, okay, I got the point. Yeah. It does go on a little bit long, but that goes back to my point. I think that this is supposed to be on in the background at like a circuit party. Like this is for circuit gays to have on in the back of a party while everyone's like on G, like that's what this is supposed to be for. But this is like, I'm saying this kind of with some affection because like compared to the early Torchlight movies that DeCoteau directed that were ostensibly for straight people, and the sex was shot very indifferently and very dispassionately and just kind of like, all right, when can I get over this? This is a movie that lingers on these scenes. He's doing something he really wants to be doing. He's doing something he loves. He's kind of representing this part of himself that gets a little stifled by a lot of his other genre filmmaking, or gets kind of like derided or gets kind of mocked, So I'm happy that he gets this chance to sort of like get this out, and make these movies that he want to make.
Oh yeah, I mean some of these the shots in this are blocked in a way where like an actor's laying down and another actor walks into frame with just his midsection, and you get like a lingering like almost close up of just like the cock basket of his boxer briefs. And it's like, I mean, but that makes me wonder now. Like, I think you're totally right, Sarah, like what the purpose for a movie like this is. And I also feel like, if you're exercising some kink demons with this one, this serves the same purpose as like, a Playgirl or a nudie mag does. But it doesn't necessarily serve the purpose of what a hardcore porn would serve. So I wonder if these types of kind of softcore. You can't even call this pornography because there's no penetration in it. I guess we can have a debate then again about what the
definition of
really is.
It's the Supreme Court quote again. It's like, I know it when I see it. Yeah,
right. And I felt like during this I didn't see it, and I wonder if would the gay community champion a movie like this? I mean, I know it does serve one clear function, but I wonder if the queer community kind of looks down on these movies for being as tame as they are or not, because it's almost like Steve brought up the fact before that Beach Babes and Beach Babes 2 and Test Tube Teens from the year 2000 and all those have very extended sex scenes in them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if it's a movie to champion. I will say, just to your point, you didn't feel comfortable watching it in public, and I almost only feel that way about porn. So I think that is an indication of can I watch this on the subway? Nope, can't do that. That there is something pornographic to that, right?
That's a fair point.
But I think that there's a degree of camp in these movies that I think is just so it's so electric, and it's what makes them fun. And I think that there's just maybe it's not a movie you champion necessarily, but I think it's something that there is a specialness to it. And kind of like you said, I love a director that is making the movie that they want to make for themselves. This is the movie he wanted to make, and he made it, and it is exactly what he wanted it to be. And I will always celebrate when a director gets a chance to do that,
100%. Yeah, that's sort of where I land on it too, where it's just, it's maybe not for me, but not every movie needs to be for me. And I love that there are movies for everybody. And I love that there are these weird little micro genres that we get to sort of talk about within the scope of our show. We come up with a lot of these really strange sort of trends in film, and I think this is one of kind of the most niche, but it's still an underrepresented one, and as the conversation around queer horror is continuing and evolving and growing, and I think improving in general, I think we're gonna be putting movies like this a little bit more in perspective in terms of their historical relevance.
Well, there's that, and also just looking back at movies from the past and recognizing sort of queer subtext where we maybe never saw it before. I know I watched Reanimator again recently, which is a movie I've seen 480 times probably in my life.
Yeah.
But I mean, this time I kind of noticed I paid a little bit of attention to you can make an argument of the queer coded nature of the relationship between Dan Kane and Herbert West.
Sure.
In that movie.
As someone who was on tumblr.com in between the years of 2011 and 2015, a lot of people made that argument. I will tell you that.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
There was a lot of fan fiction. There was a micro trend of that movie, and there was a kind of a little fandom that popped up, and there was a lot of that going around at the time.
Okay.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And there's that one. And then if you ever have read the amazing book edited by Joe Valise, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but the It Came from the Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror book it's really outstanding. If you ever get a chance to pick up that book,
I will check that out. Yeah,
because it's really cool. Because what it does is it doesn't sort of spend time talking about movies in which the themes are so overt that they're text instead of subtext. It talks about movies. It talks about Tom McBride, the openly gay actor playing the Mark in a wheelchair in Friday the 13th 2, and how he was sort of a queer icon. And then it talks about movies like Get Out and Halloween and Child's Play and The Blair Witch Project and Nightmare on Elm Street and Dead Ringers and The Wolfman, and in ways that you are hearing the perspective of queer people writing about these movies. So it's a really interesting perspective that just cis that white guy doesn't necessarily bring to that conversation. So it's really interesting. And then obviously there are notes on sleepaway camp in case you were curious in a book like this, but definitely check that one out if you want to get that perspective on a lot of movies that you never might have really thought to consider.
Yeah,
I will check that out. That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for being here for these very wild movies. We had a really good time talking about these. Where can people find all of your stuff if they want to check out what you've been working on?
Sure. So the social media I'm the most active on is Instagram. You can find me there at City Mystic. You can also check out my website, sarah-lyons.com. I am the director of a feature film called The Woods. We just got distribution through Terror Films, which is very exciting. And we are probably looking at a late summer, early fall release for that. Nice. But there will be more information coming out on that as it goes along. So follow me there. I'm going to be doing some screenings across the country for the foreseeable future. So if you want to see the movie, if you are a bar owner or a venue owner, if you have a small theater or something like that and you want to screen independent horror, hit me up. I would love to make something work. But yeah, those are the best places to find me.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you seek out Sarah's stuff and you go and attend one of these screenings of The Woods or check it out wherever it plays near you, I'm sure you are definitely going to enjoy it, especially if you liked this conversation. And if you like what we do every single week, I forgot to say it this time, but like, if this was your first episode, if this was your entry point to the show, I hope you think that we did these movies justice and that you go back and listen to the entire back catalog.
Yeah.
If you've been following the show since the beginning, or a return listener and you love the fact that we're shining a spotlight on some of these movies, thank you for tuning in and supporting the show. The best thing that you can do personally to help more people see it is to go on to Apple Podcast or Spotify, drop us a 5-star rating, maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined to do so. You can also comment on the episodes on Spotify and talk kind of directly to us that way. If you want to keep up with the show, you can follow us on Instagram at puppetmasters_castle-freaks. You can follow me at _Giallo_Jared or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We're on Threads and Blue Sky and all that fun stuff. And the audio versions of the show are on our YouTube channel. We'll hope to add some stuff to that in the future. We can't focus on that too much right now because as you can tell by the fact that I almost missed this recording, I'm very busy. But Steve is also incredibly busy working on another show as well. Steve, what's that?
That show is called Cinema Arcade. It is cinema and arcade mashed together. That is what we do. We are watching movies and then playing video games based on those movies to see how they complement each other, detract from each other, or otherwise not mesh at all. We'll find out exactly how it goes. Literally, like immediately after ending this recording, I'm going to go record an episode on Muppet Treasure Island, which is a wild double feature of podcasts for me.
What a day of work.
That's a hell of a day. But we've also got recent episodes on like the first 2 Predator movies and The Phantom starring Billy Zane. We've got an episode coming up on Jackass. It's going to be a lot of fun. So lots of cool stuff to check out. And then just about 100 episodes of back episodes to check out. And if you want to check us out, you sure should next week, because we are going to be talking about a movie called Hell Asylum from 2002. Speaking of Deborah Mayer, back again in this movie, directed by a friend of the show, Danny Draven, with a lot of familiar faces popping up again. I don't know a whole lot about this movie, but I'm excited to check it out.
Yeah, we will be back to do another double D, Danny Draven, another double dose of Deborah as we sign off of our double dose of DeCoteau for today. Just there were no women in this yet. Somehow lots of double Ds in this
you know
episode.
It. Well, there's a double D of a different kind in these movies. So.
That's very true. It's very true.
Man, I can't think of a better place to sign off than there. So thank you again to Sarah Lyons for taking the time and having this conversation with us. Thank you again to everyone who listens, and check us out next week for Hell Asylum. See you then.